The first sip could have ended everything. Jasmine King, a 28-year-old black waitress, moved quietly through the opulent dining hall of a London private club, carrying trays laden with crystal glasses. Edward Hawthorne, a 52-year-old white billionaire, sat at the center table, laughing at his own jokes, unaware that someone in the room had noticed a quiet threat. A young man in a shadowed corner, holding a small vial hidden beneath his cuff, had slipped something into Edward's glass, a poison so subtle it would act slowly, almost imperceptibly, giving the moment a deadly elegance. Jasmine's trained gaze caught the slight shimmer in the liquid as she approached, her heart racing but her mind precise. Without hesitation, she swapped Edward's glass with another from the tray, her movements smooth, silent, rehearsed from years of working in high-pressure kitchens and studying subtle signs of danger. No one in the room noticed the switch, not the snooty patrons sipping their champagne, not the waiters hustling between tables, and certainly not Edward, whose laughter still echoed arrogantly. Jasmine placed the original glass into the tray and set it down discreetly, her hands steady, her pulse quickened but her face calm, because courage is silent when stakes are high. As she returned to the service station, her eyes briefly met Edward's across the room, and for a fraction of a second, the billionaire's gaze sharpened, sensing an unspoken awareness he could not name. She adjusted her apron, wiped her hands on the cloth, and moved as if nothing had happened, while internally calculating every second until the poison would have reached its victim if she had not acted. The tension in the air was invisible to all but her, a storm contained within a small, unnoticed figure in the corner of the room, but it was electric, palpable. Edward raised his new glass to his lips, unaware, and took a sip, laughing again, and Jasmine exhaled quietly, relief and adrenaline mingling in a controlled rush. If you're watching and feel your heart racing with suspense, take a moment to subscribe, because what happens next will reveal the full weight of bravery. And if you've ever had to act in silence when danger lurked close, comment where you are watching from, because the story of courage is just beginning. The moment Edward Hawthorne's lips touched the swapped glass, the room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of ignorance, unaware that a disaster had been narrowly averted, and Jasmine King moved back to her station with the grace of someone who carried invisible weight on her shoulders, every step measured, every glance calculated, as the small hairs on her arms stood at attention from adrenaline. She could feel the poison's presence lingering in the corner of her mind, a threat neutralized but not forgotten, while the would-be assassin, a young man in a tailored suit with sharp eyes and a twitching hand, watched from a shadowed alcove, recognizing instantly that his plan had been foiled by someone he had underestimated, and his fingers curled around the cuff, concealing the vial as anger and fear battled in his expression. Plotting the next move, while the clinking of crystal and low murmurs of polite conversation continued around him, completely oblivious to the life-and-death chessboard unfolding in their midst. Edward raised the glass to his lips again, a sip of champagne now harmless, yet the faintest flicker in his gaze betrayed that something had shifted, that the aura of control he wielded over every room was subtly cracked by a presence he could not name nor dismiss, and for the first time he felt observed not as a guest of privilege, but as a human vulnerable to quiet, deliberate intervention. Jasmine's eyes scanned the crowd, noting each reaction, every movement, the assistants who had noticed nothing, the patrons whose laughter filled the gaps, and the subtle tension rippling from the waiter in the corner whose fingers nervously tapped against a tray, sensing that something unspoken had passed between Jasmine and the shadows, a silent battle of attention and intuition. She adjusted the tray on her hip, her mind calculating the shortest path to ensure Edward remained safe while keeping the attacker from striking again, knowing that any misstep could turn the evening into tragedy, and yet outwardly she smiled politely as she passed plates of hors d'oeuvres, masking the storm inside her with practiced elegance, her hands steady, her heart hammering behind the calm exterior. Edward, finishing his sip, noticed a slight glimmer of concern in the eyes of his head waiter, a subtle shift in the timing of service, and the billionaire's instincts prickled, recalling every story he had ever heard about luck and unseen danger, and he realized that someone had silently protected him without fanfare or acknowledgement, and that power did not always lie in wealth or status, but sometimes in awareness, courage, and timing. Jasmine, meanwhile, made mental notes of the man in the corner, his suit slightly rumpled now, eyes narrowed as he assessed her with a dangerous curiosity, and she knew she had to navigate the next few minutes with precision, keeping Edward safe while silently warning the perpetrator that their plan was exposed, every heartbeat a countdown, every movement a potential pivot between exposure and catastrophe. She placed a glass of water near Edward, smiled, and said softly, "Enjoy your evening," words carrying a weight that no one else could detect, while cameras in discreet corners captured subtle shifts in posture and expression that would later serve as evidence. The tension coiled tighter, the room unaware, and Jasmine's mind raced, calculating exits, angles, and contingencies, all while maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Edward's gaze wandered toward her for a moment, instinctively feeling gratitude he could not yet name, and a silent understanding passed in a fraction of a second that would change the way he viewed service, courage, and the underestimated, while the would-be assassin, caught between fury and panic, stepped back, realizing that his plan had crumbled silently, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. If you are watching this story and feel the thrill of unseen bravery, take a moment to subscribe, because what happens next will reveal the full stakes of courage and intelligence against hidden danger. And if you've ever protected someone without recognition, comment where you are watching from, because the final chapter will show the full power of silent heroism and the lesson it leaves behind. The air in the grand hall had shifted, heavy with tension, yet quiet enough to hear the smallest movements, as Jasmine King's mind worked in overdrive, analyzing every shadow, every gesture, every micro-expression of those around her, while Edward Hawthorne remained unaware of how narrowly his life had been spared. His attention still caught up in the glittering conversation of the elite and the clinking of champagne glasses. Jasmine's eyes flicked to the would-be assassin, the young man now visibly trembling, his carefully rehearsed calm replaced by panic and calculation as he realized the elegant, unassuming waitress he had dismissed had dismantled his plan with silent precision, leaving him exposed before witnesses he could not control. And in a room where every camera, every phone, every eye had recorded fragments of his failure that would soon add up to a narrative he could no longer deny. She noted his shallow breaths, the tremor in his hands, and the subtle shifts in his posture, knowing instinctively that the next minutes would determine whether he acted impulsively or tried to retreat unnoticed. And she prepared herself accordingly, moving with the grace and speed of someone who had spent years anticipating danger and executing flawless countermeasures without alerting the world to the storm within her. Edward's laughter echoed faintly across the room, and for a moment he leaned back, glass in hand, completely oblivious to the fact that his life had been in mortal danger and saved by the courage and awareness of a young black woman he had barely noticed before. While Jasmine's heart pounded not from fear but from focus, her thoughts racing as she calculated angles, exit routes, and contingencies for every possible action the man might take, ready to intervene silently again if required. The crowd continued its oblivious chatter, patrons raising their glasses, waiters rushing past in well-rehearsed motions, none of them noticing the quiet standoff unfolding in the corner. Yet Jasmine's presence radiated authority and control so subtly that even the would-be assassin sensed he was trapped, his plan dismantled without spectacle, and he glanced repeatedly toward exits while she moved, adjusting trays, serving hors d'oeuvres, masking the internal storm with an exterior of calm. Disciplined professionalism. Edward's instincts pricked faintly as he noticed Jasmine's steady, attentive gaze, the subtle tilt of her head that suggested she was aware of more than anyone else. A shadow of unease flickering across his face as a distant sense of gratitude began to form, though he could not yet comprehend its magnitude, and in that moment he saw her not just as a waitress, but as someone whose skill, intelligence, and courage quietly defied expectation. Jasmine allowed herself a small, controlled breath, keeping the would-be assassin within her peripheral vision, noting his increasingly erratic posture and sharp glances toward her and the exits, while subtly signaling to nearby colleagues and staff, ensuring that any escalation could be contained swiftly and decisively without alarming the diners, all while preserving the illusion of ordinary service. Her hands moved fluidly, topping glasses, arranging silverware, and guiding trays with mechanical precision, while her mind rehearsed possible interventions, the timing of each movement critical, every second a potential pivot between success and catastrophe. The young man, finally understanding that he had been bested not by brute force but by silent skill, took a step backward, uncertainty etched across his features, and for the first time his composure cracked completely, leaving him vulnerable to exposure, while Jasmine's gaze followed him, steady and unwavering, knowing that patience, timing, and courage had won the first round without anyone else even noticing. She placed another glass near Edward, smiled faintly, and murmured under her breath, "Stay safe," words loaded with unspoken meaning as the cameras and subtle witnesses captured the moment for posterity. If you are watching this story and feel your heart race with the tension of silent heroism, take a moment to subscribe, because the next chapter will bring resolution, justice, and a lesson that will linger long after the last sip is taken. And if you have ever acted quietly to protect someone, comment where you are watching from, because the conclusion will leave you inspired and reminded that courage does not always announce itself with noise. The room seemed to hold its breath as Jasmine King's eyes never left the would-be assassin, now frozen near the shadowed alcove, his plan dismantled by nothing more than her quiet precision and unshakable focus, while Edward Hawthorne, glass in hand, began to notice the subtle shift in the air, a tingling awareness that something extraordinary had just occurred, something that had saved him without his knowledge, and he felt a mix of awe, gratitude, and disbelief ripple through him as he finally understood that the unassuming waitress moving among the tables had been orchestrating the safety of everyone in her silent, elegant control. Jasmine adjusted the tray in her hands, her brown eyes scanning the room, noting every camera angle, every patron's glance, every potential hazard, all while her tightly coiled hair caught the chandelier light, reflecting the calm authority she exuded effortlessly, and the would-be assassin's face paled as he realized fully that his attempt had been witnessed and neutralized without confrontation, leaving him vulnerable and exposed, powerless against someone he had underestimated solely because of her age. Her station and her skin, Edward's instincts sharpened as he watched Jasmine place a fresh glass before him, noting the calm composure in her posture, the subtle nod of reassurance in her smile, and he suddenly saw her not as a server, not as an employee, but as a woman whose courage, intelligence, and discipline had protected him, and perhaps everyone else in the room from catastrophe, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth that real power often lies where it is least expected. The crowd remained largely unaware, their chatter and laughter masking the tension that had run through the hall only moments before. Yet Jasmine's presence radiated an authority so quiet, so precise, that even the young man in the corner recognized he had no control, no leverage, and no recourse, his plan collapsing entirely in the face of disciplined, deliberate courage. She moved with flawless grace, clearing plates, adjusting silverware, and passing trays, all while mentally mapping the safest exits and tracking his every movement, knowing that any misstep could still have consequences, but trusting in the skill, patience, and timing that had guided her through countless high-stress moments, training her body and mind to act decisively without spectacle. Edward finally met her gaze directly, the first true acknowledgement of her actions, and in that instant he felt a profound respect and gratitude, understanding that a life could be preserved, a tragedy avoided, not by wealth, influence, or loud heroics, but by awareness, courage, and integrity quietly applied. A lesson that humbled him completely and rewrote his perception of power. Jasmine returned to her station, exhaling softly, pulse steadying, the would-be assassin having retreated, and the subtle admiration of staff and patrons alike weaving through the room, proving that silent heroism, precise intelligence, and moral courage could alter outcomes in ways that loud authority never could. If you are watching this story and feel inspired by courage that acts without recognition, take a moment to subscribe, because the lesson here is timeless. True bravery often comes quietly, in moments unnoticed, and changes lives profoundly. And if you have ever acted decisively when no one was watching, comment where you are viewing from, because real strength does not demand applause, yet it leaves an impact that endures forever.